there is a ton of material tested on the bar exam and that this is a really intense timed test, time management is often something that many people struggle with when we're talking about studying for and taking the bar exam. So in this video, I want to give you some tips for how to handle time management on the bar exam. My first tip is, as you are studying, prioritize the highly tested issues and material. Not everything is tested equally on the bar exam. So being aware of where you're going to get the most points from can help you decide exactly how to spend your time the most efficiently while you're studying. For instance, if you think about real property. In real property, about 5 of your 25 real property multiple choice questions test mortgages. That's a pretty big portion of the questions that test that one subsection of real property. So it's worth spending some time making sure you understand mortgages, that you can work your way through a mortgages question, and that you know how they're tested. On the other hand, the rule against perpetuities typically makes up 1, maybe 2 questions on the bar exam. So it's not nearly as highly tested, but we know it's a really difficult rule. You could easily spend days trying to review and memorize and understand the rule against perpetuities. But given that it's only worth probably 1 point on the multiple choice portion of the bar exam, that's not a great use of your time. So to manage your time well, make sure you're setting aside plenty of time for the highly tested material, and that for that not so highly tested material, you understand when it's time to just move on because it's simply not worth it to keep focusing on that area. My second tip is to stay away from time-consuming study techniques. Many students like to make flashcards for the bar exam, and although flashcards can be helpful in theory to quiz yourself on and to review the material, they can also take a really long time to make. If you decide to make flashcards for every piece of law that could be tested on the bar exam, you're probably still going to be making those flashcards right up to the bar exam. And that means you don't really have a lot of time to actually review the flashcards and to use them for what they're meant for. So instead of doing something time-consuming like flashcards, try to find more efficient study methods. So you could quiz yourself, for instance, by opening your outline, reading a page, cover it up, see if you can state it out loud, and then uncover it, see how you did. You didn't take the time to write out everything, but you still get the same level of quizzing and review that you would have received with the flashcards. You can also find a friend who will quiz you on the material. You can make flashcards for little pieces of the law that you might find helpful. So for instance, if you want to make flashcards for the evidence hearsay exceptions, that might be a good use of your time to make a small set of flashcards for that particular area, but you don't need to make flashcards or do really time-consuming memorization techniques for the entire amount of material that's tested on the bar exam. In addition, be conscious of how much bar prep material you're using. Try to limit yourself to 1 outline per subject. Students commonly make the mistake of thinking that they need to know everything, every detail, every way it could be tested, every different version of that law. And so they pile up mountains of books and preparation material from different companies and different sources and different people to help them study for the bar exam. You're going to quickly become overwhelmed by that volume of material, and you're going to spend too much time comparing and contrasting and looking for differences and trying to find the nuances that are maybe in one book but not in another, and that's not a great use of your time. So instead, limit yourself to 1 set of bar prep materials, 1 outline per subject, and just use that 1 outline to memorize the material. If you know that you struggle with timing on exams, you should start to work on timing early. So as you're doing practice questions, practice essays, practice multiple choice, think about timing. Now, that's not to say that every multiple choice question that you do should be timed. But if you know that you struggle to finish multiple choice questions under time circumstances, Start to work in some small sets of time questions early on in bar prep. So maybe the first week, you do a small set of 10 questions under time conditions. In week 2, you could do 15 questions under time conditions, or maybe 2 sets of 10 questions under time conditions. You should do some other questions that aren't timed. Do them slowly to make sure that you're unpacking those questions and you're understanding how and what the examiners are asking. But by working some small time sets into your study practice right from the outset, you can make sure that you're working on your timing and that you're not going to have an issue as we get closer and closer to the exam. Another thing that you can do if you struggle with timing on the exam is develop a Scantron strategy. Now, even if you're not taking an in-person exam, you should have some sort of strategy for what you're going to do with those really long questions that might bog you down. A lot of people, for instance, struggle with the exceptionally long mortgages questions on the multiple choice portion of the exam. So before the exam, you should pre-decide what are you going to do when you come across a really long mortgages question. Are you going to answer it, or are you going to skip it and come back to it at the end because you know that it's something that's going to slow you down, is going to create some mental drain, and might have a negative effect on the next few questions after that question. So you could, for instance, decide that as soon as you see one of those really long mortgages questions, you're going to skip it. And on a Scantron, you should note that. You could put, for instance, a little dot on your Scantron next to that question to indicate that you had skipped it altogether. And that's an indication that when you finish all the rest of the questions and you get to the end, you should come back to that question first because you didn't even attempt it as you went through all the questions initially. If you want to try the question, but you know that you really need to move on, so you'd like to come back to it if you have some extra time, but you did answer it, so you're okay with your answer, you could use something else to signify that on your Scantron, like a dash. So in this method, you could dot the questions that you skip altogether and dash the questions that you would like to come back to and reconsider if you have some additional time. And this will allow you to move more quickly through the questions, just move on to the next question, hopefully finish all of them, and even more so, hopefully you'll have time at the end to come back and review those. And you've already prioritized which ones you need to come back to first. So you should practice this as you're doing practice exams and think about what type of method works best for you as far as answering the questions in the multiple choice section. I hope you found these tips helpful to manage your time for the bar exam, and best of luck on the exam.